The physician serial killer. Born on October 21, 1954, Swango was a physician by profession, but his thirst for death and destruction knew no bounds. It's estimated that he was involved in as many as 60 fatal poisonings of patients and colleagues, a number that's enough to send shivers down anyone's spine. Bruce Wayne presents another bone-chilling episode where he explores the depths of human darkness and the unimaginable horrors that lurk within. Today, we delve into the twisted mind of one of the most prolific and deadly serial killers in American history, Michael Joseph Swango. But what drove this man to commit such heinous acts? Was it a thirst for power, a desire for revenge, or a sadistic pleasure in watching others suffer? As we take a closer look at Swango's life and crimes, we'll unravel the twisted web of lies and deception that he wove around himself and discover the shocking truth behind his reign of terror. Swango may have admitted to causing only 4 deaths, but the extent of his depravity is far greater than anyone could have imagined. In the year 2000, he was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, and he now resides in ADX Florence, a maximum security prison where even the most hardened criminals are held. So buckle up and prepare to be riveted by the spine-tingling story of Michael Joseph Swango, the physician serial killer who sent shockwaves through the medical community and beyond. This is not for the faint of heart, but for those who dare to delve into the darkness. Join us on this journey into the mind of a monster. Michael Swango was a man of mystery, a complicated character with a dark past that would eventually catch up with him. Born in Tacoma, Washington, and raised in Quincy, Illinois, he was the middle child of Muriel and John Virgil Swango. John was a decorated United States Army officer who served in the Vietnam War and returned home as an alcoholic. His struggles with addiction would ultimately lead to his divorce from Muriel, leaving Michael to grow up without a father figure. Despite his troubled family life, Michael excelled academically and was the valedictorian of his 1972 Quincy Catholic Boys High School class. He was also a talented musician, playing the clarinet in the school band. But after high school, Michael's path took a darker turn. He joined the Marine Corps and graduated from recruit training at Marine Corps Recruit Depot in San Diego. But his time in the military left him with a newfound fascination with death and dying. When he left the military, Michael enrolled at Quincy University, where he quickly distinguished himself as a brilliant student. But instead of focusing on his studies, he worked as an ambulance attendant, drawn to the dying patients he encountered on the job. And as it turned out, Michael's fascination with death was more than just a passing interest. Many of his assigned patients ended up experiencing life-threatening emergencies, with at least 5 of them dying. Everyone has, by the way, always tried to ask, was Michael responsible for their deaths? But it was a question that would haunt those who knew him for years to come. Michael's behavior grew increasingly troubling during his time at Southern Illinois University School of Medicine. Despite his talents as a student, he faked checkups during his GYN rotation and was suspected of doing so for years. His lackadaisical approach to his studies eventually caught up with him, and he was nearly expelled from the School of Medicine. But even after he graduated, several students and faculty members raised concerns about Michael's competence to practice medicine. As it turns out, their concerns were well-founded. Michael Swango would go on to become one of the most notorious serial killers in American history, responsible for the deaths of as many as 60 patients in hospitals across the United States and Africa. His story is a chilling reminder of the dangers that can lurk beneath the surface of even the most seemingly talented and intelligent individuals. Despite receiving a scathing evaluation in his dean's letter from the School of Medicine, Swango managed to land a surgical internship at Ohio State University Medical Center in 1983. However, as he worked in Rhodes Hall, The alarming frequency of healthy patients mysteriously dying caught the nurses' attention. Swango happened to be the floor intern each time, and one nurse even caught him injecting something into a patient who later fell ill. Despite the nurses' concerns, administrators accused them of being paranoid and cleared Swango after a quick investigation in 1984. However, Swango's work had been so careless that OSU withdrew its residency offer after his internship ended in June. OSU officials feared that Swango would sue if he was fired without cause, so they resolved to quietly push him out of the hospital as soon as possible. Swango returned to Quincy in July 1984 and began working as an emergency medical technician with the Adams County Ambulance Corps. But many of his colleagues started noticing that whenever Swango prepared coffee or brought in food, several of them became violently ill. They had no apparent cause for their sickness, but things took a chilling turn in October of that year when the Quincy Police Department arrested Swango. They found arsenic and other poisons in his possession, leading to his conviction for aggravated battery in August 1985. Swango was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Swango's conviction was a wake-up call for OSU, as law school dean James Meeks scathingly concluded that the hospital should have called in the police. The initial investigation of Swango also had several glaring shortcomings, as revealed by Meeks. Despite this, it took another decade before OSU finally conceded that they should have called in outside investigators. Upon his release from prison in 1989, Swango found work as a counselor at the State Career Development Center in Newport News, Virginia. But it wasn't long before he was caught working on a scrapbook of disasters during work time, leading to his forced resignation. Swango then worked as a laboratory technician for ATI Coal in Newport News, and it was around this time several employees complained of persistent stomach pains. Meanwhile, Swango met Kristen Lynn Kenny, a nurse at Riverside Hospital, and the two fell in love and planned to get married. After Swango resigned from ATI Coal in 1991 to seek a new job as a doctor, leaving behind a trail of suspicious deaths and illnesses in his wake. The prosecutors in Franklin County, Ohio, where Columbus is located, considered bringing charges of murder and attempted murder against Swango. Still, they ultimately decided against it due to a lack of physical evidence. Hold on, what horrors will Swango unleash in his next role as a doctor, and will he ever be brought to justice for his crimes? It was 1991 when Michael Swango decided to change his name to Daniel J. Adams, hoping to start afresh. He tried to apply for a residency program at Ohio Valley Medical Center in Wheeling, West Virginia, but was unsuccessful. However, in July 1992, he was hired at Sanford USD Medical Center in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, where he managed to forge several legal documents that allowed him to reestablish himself as a physician and a respected member of society. Swango's criminal record made it impossible for him to obtain a medical license in most states, but he managed to falsify a fact sheet from the Illinois Department of Corrections, which claimed that he had only been convicted of a misdemeanor for getting into a fistfight with a coworker and had served 6 months in prison. In reality, he had been convicted of felony poisoning and had served 5 years in prison. He also forged a letter from Virginia Governor Gerald L. Beliles, claiming that he had restored Swango's right to vote and serve on a jury, based on reports from friends and colleagues that he had committed no further crimes after his supposed misdemeanor and was leading an exemplary lifestyle. Swango established an impeccable reputation at Sanford, but his past eventually caught up with him. When he tried to join the American Medical Association, they conducted a thorough background check and discovered his conviction for poisoning. Around the same time, the Discovery Channel aired an episode of Justice Files that featured Swango, and terrified colleagues started calling for his dismissal. Sanford eventually fired Swango, and his fiancée, Kristen Lynn Kenny, left him soon after, having suffered from violent migraines during their relationship. Swango's past had finally caught up with him, but it wouldn't be the end of his deadly career. So somehow he manages to find his way into the psychiatric residency program at Stony Brook University School of Medicine in New York. Swango's first rotation is in the internal medicine department at the Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Northport, New York. It doesn't take long before his patients start dying for no apparent reason, just like before. 4 months later, a young doctor named Kinney dies by suicide, and when arsenic is found in her body at the time of her death, her mother is horrified to learn that a man with Swango's history is allowed to practice medicine. Kinney's mother contacts a nurse friend at Sanford, who alerts the dean, Robert Talley, to Swango's whereabouts. Talley then contacts Jordan Cohen, the dean at Stony Brook, and under intense questioning from the head of the psychiatric department, Swango admits that he had lied about his poisoning conviction in Illinois, and he is immediately fired. But the public outcry is so intense that Cohen and Miller are forced to resign before the end of the year. Before he resigns, Cohen sends a warning about Swango to all 125 medical schools and 1,000 teaching hospitals across the U.S., effectively blacklisting Swango from getting a medical residency at any American institution. But the story doesn't end there. Because the latest Swango incident took place at a Veterans Affairs facility, federal authorities got involved. Swango drops out of sight until mid-1994, when the FBI finds out he's living in Atlanta and working as a chemist at a computer equipment company's wastewater facility. But when the FBI alerts the company, Swango is fired for lying on his job application. The FBI then obtains a warrant charging Swango with using fraudulent credentials to gain entry to a Veterans Affairs hospital. By this time, Swango has already fled the country, but he doesn't stop there. In November 1994, he settled in Zimbabwe and used forged documents to obtain a job at Manene Lutheran Mission Hospital in the center of the country. Once again, his patients begin dying mysteriously. The medical director, Dr. Christopher Zashiri, becomes suspicious of Swango and suspends him. But because of the failure to perform adequate autopsies, no firm conclusions can be drawn. During his suspension, Swango hires lawyer David Coulthard to enable him to return to clinical practice. He also appeals to the authorities at Mapilo Hospital in Bulawayo to allow him to continue working voluntarily there. However, this is opposed by Abdallah Mesbah, a surgical resident who has often found Swango snooping around mysteriously in the wards and in the intensive care unit, even when not on call. Mesbah suspects that the sudden deaths of some patients are due to Swango, but has no proof at that stage. As the investigation into Swango's deadly activities intensified, he became increasingly paranoid. He rented a room from a widowed woman in Bulawayo, Zimbabwe, and she fell violently ill after eating a meal prepared by Swango. Concerned for her health, she sought the help of local surgeon Michael Cotton. Suspecting arsenic poisoning, Cotton convinced her to send hair samples for forensic analysis in Pretoria, South Africa. The results confirmed toxic levels of arsenic in her hair, leading to the lab reports being passed on to the Zimbabwe Republic Police Criminal Investigation Department, CID, and eventually to the FBI through Interpol. The authorities were closing in on Swango, and he knew it. He fled to Zambia, then Namibia, where he found temporary medical work. Despite being charged in absentia with poisonings, Swango still had the audacity to apply for a job at the Royal Hospital in Dhahran, Saudi Arabia, using a false resume in March 1997. As Swango continued to evade authorities, Tom Valerie, chief investigator for the Office of Inspector General of the Department of Veterans Affairs, VA, sought the expertise of Charlene Thomason, a forensic psychiatrist. With her clinical skills, Thomason was able to provide a criminal profile of Swango and an assessment of his motives for committing such heinous crimes. Valerie was later contacted by the FBI to discuss Swango's capture and contacted Richard Thomason, stationed in the DEA's Manhattan field office, to discuss the case. The conversation centered on Swango's fraudulent activities at the VA, where he lied on his government application and prescribed narcotic medications. Immigration and Naturalization Service agents arrested Swango in June 1997 during a layover at Chicago O'Hare International Airport on his way to Saudi Arabia, where he had applied for a job using a false resume. Swango pleaded guilty to defrauding the government in March 1998. Faced with undeniable evidence of his fraudulent activities and the possibility of a lengthy inquiry into his time in Zimbabwe, he was sentenced to 3.5 years in prison, during which he was not allowed to prepare or deliver food or have any involvement in preparing or distributing drugs. Despite the FBI, VA, and prosecutors for the Eastern District of New York's belief that Swango was a serial killer, they knew that it would be difficult to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. They also had limited time to gather enough evidence to amass that proof. As federal inmates must serve at least 85% of their sentences before being eligible for time off with good behavior, they had only 3 years to prove Swango was a murderer before he would be released. They feared he would kill again if they could not find enough evidence to convict Swango. The government used this time to build a dossier of Swango's crimes. They exhumed the bodies of 3 patients and discovered poisonous chemicals in them, as well as evidence that Swango had paralyzed patient Baron Harris with an injection of what was supposedly a sedative. The sedative caused Harris to lapse into a coma, and he died on November 9, 1993. Dr. Michael Swango was a man who had sworn an oath to heal and save lives, but he had a darker side that was hidden from the world. He had killed before, and he was about to do it again. The revelation that Swango had lied about the death of Cynthia Ann McGee sent shockwaves through the medical community. During his internship at OSU, Cynthia Ann McGee had been one of Swango's patients. Swango had claimed that McGee had died of heart failure, but it was later discovered that he had injected her with potassium, causing her heart to stop. This was just the tip of the iceberg. On July 11, 2000, just days before his release from prison on the fraud charge, Swango was charged with 3 counts of murder, 1 count of assault, and 1 count each of false statements, mail fraud, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud by federal prosecutors on Long Island, New York. This was just the beginning of the nightmare for Swango. At the same time, authorities in Zimbabwe charged him with poisoning 7 patients, 5 of whom died. The extent of Swango's crimes was becoming more apparent with each passing day. 1 week before the indictment was handed down, FBI agents interviewed Swango in prison and informed him that he would be extradited to Zimbabwe to face charges of murder and attempted murder on the day of his release. Swango was facing the possibility of the death penalty, and he knew that his only hope was to negotiate a plea agreement. The negotiations were tense, but eventually prosecutors agreed not to pursue the death penalty or extradition in exchange for Swango accepting a sentence of life in prison without parole. This was the end of the road for Swango, but it was just the beginning of the horror for those who had been affected by his crimes. Swango was formally indicted on July 17, 2000, and pleaded not guilty. However, on September 6, he changed his plea to guilty for the 3 murder counts, as well as counts of wire fraud and mail fraud, before Judge Jacob Mishler. During his sentencing hearing, prosecutors read passages from Swango's notebook, in which he described the joy he felt during his crimes. It was a chilling account of a man who had no remorse for the lives he had taken. Swango admitted to causing 3 murders, lying about his involvement in causing a 4th death, and lying about his 1985 conviction. Judge Mishler sentenced Swango to 3 consecutive terms of life without parole. He is currently incarcerated at ADX Florence, a prison he requested to be sent to after being stabbed by another inmate while serving time for lying to the VA. The irony was not lost on those who knew Swango's past. In his book, Blind Eye, Quincy native James B. Stewart estimated that Swango might be linked to as many as 35 suspicious deaths at the School of Medicine, and the FBI believes he may be responsible for as many as 60 deaths, potentially making him one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. The sheer scale of Swango's crimes is staggering. And it is a testament to the tireless work of law enforcement officials that he was finally brought to justice. The story of Dr. Michael Swango is a cautionary tale about the danger of trusting those who have taken an oath to heal and protect. Swango's crimes have left a lasting impact on the medical community and the families of his victims. It is a reminder that evil can hide in plain sight, and that it is our responsibility to remain vigilant and ensure that justice is served. Thank you for tuning in to learn about the case of the physician serial killer, Swango. This chilling story reminds us that danger can lurk in unexpected places, even in the trusted hands of a medical professional. Swango's use of poisons and prescription drugs to commit his heinous crimes is a sobering reminder of the immense responsibility that healthcare workers hold in their hands. But it also highlights the importance of remaining vigilant, speaking up when we see something concerning, and always advocating for our own health and safety. What do you think about Swango? Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. Donations are much appreciated. And download our easy weight loss TV channel for more amazing stories.